Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
We all have things that we care about, but we don't all have to care about the same things. And I think that's the other problem, is that we're all told success is like bigger, better, faster, more. You got to wear the right clothes in exactly the right size. You got to get the right job. You got to get the right school. You got to get the right internship, all of these things. But who's to define what right is?
Hack Your Happiness is a podcast designed to bring you the behind the scenes of what brings iconic individuals happiness, plus their life hacks.
I'm Mercedes.
And I'm Anastasia.
Today we are speaking with Laura Gassner Otting.
I kind of accidentally fell into what I'm doing now in the same way that I accidentally fell into every single thing that I ever did.
Laura Gassner
Otting.
Laura Gassner Otting.
Author.
Mindset coach.
Bestselling author.
Bestselling author and mindset coach Laura Gassner Otting. Laura!
Is there a way to overcome this kind of imposter syndrome mindset?
Let's break down the term for a minute. Imposter, you don't belong here. Or syndrome, you seem a little sick. It's a diagnosis? No.
What is your experience with change, and what are your top 3 tips to embrace it?
I'm gonna answer the question a little bit differently at first by telling you about my favorite study. It's the coin flip study. And the coin flip study goes like this.
Something that you struggle with and that others may not expect.
I think that people are surprised when I tell them,
Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
Welcome, Laura.
hi, it's great to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. Anastasia and I are absolutely excited, and you are a top keynote speaker, as well as, like I said, a best-selling author. So tell us a bit about yourself and your backstory. How did you get to where you are today?
Well, I could tell you the story in one of two ways. I could either tell you the story about all the perfect strategic decisions I made along the way, or I could tell you the truth.
Your listening truly means the entire world to Anastasia and I, and we would love to invite you to join the Happiness family, which is completely free, and that way you'll never miss another episode of Hack Your Happiness. You can join the family by following this podcast on whichever podcast listening platform you're on now.
Which is that I kind of accidentally fell into what I'm doing now in the same way that I accidentally fell into every single thing that I ever did. Because I think at your age, there's a lot of pressure to have it all figured out and know exactly what you're doing and think that success is this direct path. But the truth is, and I spent 20 years in executive search, which meant I spent 20 years recruiting the most successful people in the world into positions that they didn't even know existed, right? So it was my job to find the most successful people ever, recruit them away for even bigger jobs. And I can tell you that every single person that I spoke to, they made left turns and right turns and U-turns. There was literally never a direct path human who was interesting enough to be that successful. So I dropped out of law school because I heard this unknown governor from Arkansas talking about this idea of service, community service in exchange for college tuition. And I was like, oh, that needs to happen. I dropped out of law school. I joined the campaign. I was paid in all the ramen soup and cold pizza I could eat. He ended up in the White House, so I ended up in the White House. I helped create AmeriCorps, the National Service Program. And then I left that to go into executive search, mostly because the boy I was dating was about to move to Boston, where this executive search firm was based. And I was like, he seems like the one, I should go. So I went, and then I figured out what on earth executive search actually was. By the way, we got married. We've been married for 28 years, so that was a good decision. I spent 4 years doing executive search for the best and the brightest. And then I had this moment of rage where I was like, I can do this smarter and better and with more authenticity and more integrity and better for me and better for the clients if I do it a different way. And I marched into my boss's office and I was like, there is a better way. And he was like, there's the door. So I started my own firm and I ran my own firm for 15 years, eventually selling it to the women who helped me build it. And I left, not knowing what I was going to do, but raising a lot of money for Hillary because I wanted to see a woman in the White House. And she didn't get back to the White House. I didn't get back to the White House. But along the way, I wrote a blog post that got some attention. I got asked to do a TEDx talk. I said, no freaking way. That's terrifying. I don't want to speak in public. Speaking in public is really scary. And my kids, about your age, dared me to do it. So 6 weeks later, I'm on the stage. I'm giving that talk. I'm scared out of my mind that something's going to come out of one under the other. And I survive it. And then the talk gets some attention. And I get offered $1,500 to fly across the country to Boise, Idaho, to give a speech. And I was like, wait, this is a job? You can get paid to just talk? So I became a speaker. And that brings us up to today.
Oh my gosh, Laura, your story is incredible.
I love that so much.
I love it, and I absolutely love kind of the go with the flow
Totally.
that it kind of promotes. It's like, you know what, going into high school or going into college, you don't need to have it all figured out. And in fact, even if you think you do, it'll probably change. Like you said, every successful and interesting person in any industry really has different kind of paths that they've gone on.
Yeah, like think about it this way. If you had asked me to give you advice right now, like when I was your age, okay, that was like in 1932. But if you had asked me to give you advice, I would have been like, wait, I'm listening to advice that's being given over a podcast that was recorded on the internet that I'm listening to on my iPhone through my AirPods. Like none of those things existed. So even if I did know who I was and what I wanted when I was your age, the world around me would have changed so much that like there are just so many more opportunities to do anything that there were then. So I think, you know, it's a little bit of go with the flow. It's a little bit of say yes and know that there's an adventure around every corner. And it's a little bit of just honestly not being selective about what you do, but selective about who you do it with. So I've always thought if you do interesting things with interesting people, interesting opportunities arise. So I've just made sure that every door I walk into, there's just more doors inside of that room than less doors inside of that room. So I'm just increasing my optionality every time I say yes to something because I don't know what I'm going to want to do. I'm just going to want to have choices. And choices are freedom.
For sure. I think that's such a good mindset to have. As well as, you know, I feel like we can do so many things that can feel scary, like speaking at a TEDx. And, you know, you've never done anything like that before is so brave. I would be so scared. I know sometimes I'm scared to like give a presentation to my class.
I know a lot
that
of
would
teams,
be so scary.
Yeah. So here's my favorite quote of all. Eleanor Roosevelt said, we would worry much less about what people thought about us if we realized how seldomly they did. Like, nobody's thinking about you. The fact that you're up there in your class and you're so afraid to give a presentation, nobody's paying attention to you because they're all sitting in their seat going, oh no, I got to give a presentation too. How am I going to do it? Like, everyone is so worried about themselves. Like, we're all just a bunch of like narcissist gnats who have no memory and who just like think about ourselves. And so the amount of fear that you have about yourself crowds out any fear, any thinking that you're going to have about anybody else. And what I learned is this, like the biggest hack to speaking is that you don't actually have to be brave for the full, like how long is a presentation that you give in class? Like 10 minutes? You don't have to be brave for 10 minutes. You have to be brave for like 60 seconds. You get up there and you start and then you're fine, right? Like you're not scared in minute 8. You're scared in minute 1. So like you just have to get through the first minute. So just really know how you're going to manage the first minute. And then you're totally in the flow and you're totally fine. Like we think we have to be super brave. And the only way to do things is like be courageous and be confident. And everyone's like, if you can dream it, you can do it. And I think that's nonsense because like I could dream I could be the Queen of England all day long, but I'm never going to be the Queen of England. No one's bringing me crumpets and tea at 3 p.m. But if you do it, then you can start dreaming it. So if you do the first minute, you can imagine the rest of it going really well, right? So just start. Just be brave enough to start. You don't have to be brave enough to get through it or to finish. Just to be brave enough to start and the rest of it comes.
Exactly. It's kind of like that concept of breaking the inertia.
Exactly.
It's just like start and then go from there and like don't have, you know, the next 15 steps planned out, but really just like going with the flow.
And you don't have to have the next 15 years figured out or the next 15 months. You just got to start.
Yeah, and I mean, you've experienced so many amazing parts of your entire journey. What do you think has been your greatest challenge and how did you overcome this?
My greatest challenge, I think, has always been fear of rejection. Right? And I mean, I'm in a career where I literally stand on stage and I ask people to clap for me. So like that's kind of a tough fear to have. But I think, you know, I've always been afraid that like people aren't going to like me and they're not going to invite me to the party. They're not going to like have me out to dinner, right? Like I've just that like, am I being too much? Am I being too little? Right? Like that fear of rejection. And the way that I don't want to say the way I've overcome it because I'm still overcoming it every single day is I've come to realize that there are people who are going to love me and there are people that are going to hate me. And sometimes it has to do with me being horrible or me being awesome. And sometimes it has to do with a whole lot more about their own baggage that they bring to the table. And there's not much I can do if somebody wants to interpret me being too much as me being arrogant if they're feeling super insecure, right? Like I love that, like if I'm too much, go find less. Like I love that statement. So like there are going to people that are going to be like, whoa, she's confident, which, for women, right? Like she's ambitious. That's like a code word for, the B word. So, or worse. But I've just come to get over it by knowing that there are going to be some people for whom I am it. And there's some people for whom I am not. And I'm just going to spend a lot more time with the people who are my people and not the ones who are not.
Totally. There are tons of people in this world.
Tons of people in the world.
And I love that statement. If I'm too much for you, find less.
Exactly.
Because
I love that. Yeah, the first time I saw that, I was like, I want to needlepoint that on a pillow. Like that's like I need that put right here. A friend of mine just sent me a sticker. I won't curse, but you'll know the word. And the sticker said something like, "FU is code for I am worthy." And I was like, oh, yes, yes.
Totally. And I just think it's such a great statement because it's about the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're happy with who you are, if you're confident and you're being authentic, you should never put yourself down or make yourself smaller for someone else. And so, there are people who will get along with you better, who will like you better, but just know that if someone doesn't love you, it's not your fault.
Yeah. And I think that what I found is like the fear of rejection is something that teens deal with so much. And I agree. Like, I think sometimes when as a teen, you're like, oh, when I'm like 30, I'm going to be confident and like know who I am. But I think you're right. Like it doesn't go away. You have to work at it and work at becoming confident in yourself.
Absolutely. It doesn't go away. For my last book, Wonder Hell, I interviewed 100 different glass ceiling shatterers, Olympic medalists, startup unicorns, thinkers, creatives, philanthropists, artists, like everyday people like us. And even like I interviewed people that were starting, like women who were starting their second billion-dollar company, right? Or guys who were at the top of a gold medal run with a gold medal in their pocket from the day before, still thinking like, this is when people figure out I'm a fraud. This is when I fail. This is when it doesn't work out. And I was like, well, if they can't get over this fear, like there's no help, there's no hope for the rest of us, right? Like, what are we going to do? And the way that they got past this fear, this sort of like imposter syndrome, rejection, lack of confidence, is they had the most simple mindset hack in the world. Like it's the most simple mindset hack. Instead of saying, I've never done this before, like, oh no, I'm going to fail. Like it's full of rejection. It's going to be awful. I've never done this before. They just say, I've never done this before. And by just changing where they put the emphasis on the word, it went from uncertainty and risk and embarrassment to adventure, learning opportunity, right? Like it just changed the way that they approached it. So they were like, I've never done this before. Cool. It might be great. It might be terrible. Who knows? And they just saw it as an educational opportunity. So like, yeah, there are going to be some people who definitely don't love you. And for the most part, it has a lot to do with them. There are some people like you should go to school on that and be like, was I a jerk? Was I thoughtless? Was I lacking in self-awareness? And where you were, figure that out. Apologize, own it, improve, right? Like Maya Angelou, when we know better, we do better, right? Like do better. But also know that like there are just some people that you're just not going to be their cup of tea, and that's okay too.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is so true. Like realizing really like the value that you have and versus how others perceive you, and that those are two separate things. And so I think that, that mindset shift is incredible in terms of what those top performers do. And so from Wonder Hell, where you interviewed all of these incredible ceiling, glass shattering individuals, what would you say is the biggest thing that you took away from those interviews?
The biggest thing that I took away was that they were masters at renegotiating all of the emotions that come every time they achieve something, thought they were done, and realized that they had more inside of them. So every time we experience success, right? Like if you're in an honors class, you're like, what about an AP class? I took the AP class. What about another one? I got into this school. Could I get into that school, right? Like you're at a point in your life where there are just so many boxes to check off, and everyone tells you like, when you graduate, you're done. You're not done. Then there's college, right? Then there's the major. Then there's the dean's list. Then there's the right internship. Then there's the right job. Then there's graduate school, right? You're never done. I'm going to be 54 years old. I'm hoping that I'm still not done, right? To think that you're done, that there's a finite end to your growth means, like that would be really depressing if like this is, you're done, like you're 18 and you're done, like you're finished growing. So every time these people got themselves into a new place, they were like, oh, wait, I achieved this. I didn't even know that that next thing was even available to me. Now that I see it, I kind of want to go after that, right? Like I kind of want that thing, like ego, like it's great. And then what happens is as soon as they start thinking, I started a $1 million company, what about a $10 million? What about a $100 million? What about a $1 billion company? Then they start getting the imposter syndrome and the doubt and the uncertainty and the anxiety and the envy and the exhaustion and the burnout, and all those emotions start coming at them. And what they did, instead of just going, oh, okay, that's just a necessary evil. I need to rise and grind. I need to hustle harder. I got to 10x. I got to lean in. They just went, you know what? I'm just going to stop for a minute and pause and listen to those emotions and learn from those emotions. So maybe I'm feeling burnout. Why am I feeling burnout? Am I too busy, or am I too busy doing the wrong things? Maybe I'm feeling envy. Am I feeling envy because I want what that person has? Do I really? Because it doesn't look as good as I actually think it does, or is the world telling me that I want that thing? So they're able to stop and pause, and at every single emotion, listen to them, learn from them, renegotiate their relationship with them, and then see them as these helpful allies along the way, instead of like slings and arrows that have to be like pushed down and swallowed and pushed aside and just kind of like struggled through. So they didn't learn how to survive the stress. They learned how to thrive in it by seeing it as a waypoint rather than this end point for them.
Right. That is so interesting, Laura, because I think that that's something that a lot of us need to work on, is like kind of that self-awareness. Like when you're aware of, okay, I feel this way, why? And is this a reason? Like, is it reasonable to feel that? Sometimes I think we get so into the emotion. We're like, oh, I'm so stressed. Like, and then we're like, wait, take a moment, take a step back. Like, what am I actually so worried about? Or maybe we're like really jealous of a friend. We're like, I'm so jealous of them. Like, why do they get to all these amazing things and I don't get any of it? And we're like, wait, but they have this stressor and this struggle and I don't have to deal with that. So like, maybe I wouldn't want necessarily to have everything that they have. And so like really that self-awareness is something that we need in order to be successful and happy.
Yeah. And let's take envy as a perfect example, right? Like, who of us hasn't been envious at some point of somebody else, right? Somebody else, gets on the cheerleading squad, or gets the gold medal, or gets the honors class, or like whatever the thing is, right? Somebody has this, and you can say like, well, I'm envious. What is that telling me? Do I want it? Do I really want to work as hard as them? What are they doing that's different than what I did? Maybe they made smarter decisions. Maybe they were more strategic. Maybe they cheated, right? Like, do I want the things that they had to do in order to get the thing? Maybe it's not really worth it to me. Or did I make the wrong moves, and can I learn something for next time, right? So we can stop and we can learn from these moments, because I think like the stress industrial complex out there basically is like, if you're not dying under this, like you're not working hard enough, right? Like I think that's nonsense. Like I think there are plenty of hours in the day. Everyone's like, Beyonce has just as many hours as you do, right? Like how come you're not putting out 15 gold albums a year? Like no, like we all have things that we care about, but we don't all have to care about the same things. And I think that's the other problem, is that we're all told success is like bigger, better, faster, more. You got to wear the right clothes in exactly the right size. You got to like get the right job. You got to get the right school. You got to get the right internship, like all of these things. But who's to define what right is, right? I joke around. My husband went to Yale University. I went to a state school, and I'm like, we're living under the same roof, right? Like it all worked out. At the end of the day, nobody cares. Like I went to University of Texas, and it's hard to get into University of Texas now, but back when I went to University of Texas, it was not as hard to get into. So I went and I would tell people, like I would, be in these really fancy offices doing this really fancy work for my search firm. And it would come up that I went to University of Texas, and everyone would be like, oh, Plan 2, which is the honors program. And I was like, Nope, just straight up state school. And they couldn't understand how I got from where I was in a state school to where I was sitting in their fancy office. But all of those things that we think are going to define us, they don't actually define us. What defines us is our openness. People can make themselves lucky by saying yes to things, by assuming that good things are going to happen, by learning from every opportunity, by acting like an extrovert. Even if you're like me, an introvert, right? You can act like an extrovert at times. And so the way to get from one place to the other isn't just checking off everybody else's externally defined markers of success, but figure out what actually matters to you, because you can't be insatiably hungry for someone else's goals. So in order to get where you want to get to, you got to find the thing that actually matters to you, and then just go after that.
I think that's so important and so impactful. And I love how you said that, I think a lot of teens worry about where they're going to go to school because they're like, I want to be the type of person who goes to an Ivy League school. But the thing is that are you really looking for that education, or are you looking to become that specific type of person? And, instead of going after that, going actually what you're interested in and following on those. And you've experienced so much different change, and you've had so many different careers
paths, yeah.
And many teens worry about imminent changes, and that means that sometimes they don't do the positive change they need in their lives because they're just afraid of just that change. So what is your experience with change, and what are your top 3 tips to embrace it?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the question a little bit differently at first by telling you about my favorite study from my last book, Wonder Hell. It's the coin flip study, and it's by the Freakonomics guys. And the coin flip study goes like this. If you are facing a big change, like you don't know what to do, like should I go to the school? Should I get that job? Should I, date this person? Like, get married, buy a house, like big decisions. And you're like, I'm afraid of change. I'm afraid to make the wrong decisions. Because that's really, at the end of the day, what change is. We're afraid to make a mistake. The coin flip study goes like this. If you flip a coin and the coin says heads, go for it, versus tails, stay where you are. If the coin says heads, go for it, people will report 2 months later that they are, quote, no worse off, and 6 months later that they are, quote, substantially better off, even if in hindsight they say it was the wrong decision. So isn't that interesting? So the coin says, go for it, you make the wrong decision. 6 months later, you're still saying, I'm actually substantially better off. Why is that? Because all of the things that we do in order to move us forward. So we're learning, we're creating networks, we're building relationships, we're getting more data, right? We're figuring out more information as we go, so that even if we decide it's the wrong decision, we can then make a better, more informed decision that puts us in an even better place than we would have if we had said no in the first place. So action always beats stagnation. That to me is so incredibly liberating, because it means in the face of change, there's never a wrong decision as long as I'm continuing to move forward, create relationships, gather data. Like, you've solved all the problems that you've faced up until this point. How did you do it? You did it by learning, by teaching, by growing, by knowing, right? You learned it by doing these things. So logic would say you probably have the ability to do all the same stuff, like the same actions, to apply to whatever the next change is that's coming. Because there is a ton of change. It is the only thing that's inevitable. It is not controllable, but what you can control is how you react to it. And if how you react is to just keep moving forward and learning and growing and meeting people, you're always going to end up in a better place.
Absolutely. And I think that is really something so important, because as a teenager, I think obviously you've experienced change, but not as much as we're going to. And sometimes that can be a little bit terrifying to think about.
I mean, you've faced more change up until this point in your life than I had faced up until this point in my life when I was your age. I mean, the pace of change that you are experiencing, and just the seismic change that you're experiencing, is a generation unlike any that we've ever had. So my hat's off to you.
Well, thank you. And I just think that's definitely where teens struggle, is like, okay, well, a lot of the change has been out of our control, like, pandemic-wise or technology-wise. Like, we don't really get a say in that, sadly. But the things that we get a say in is a lot of the things we do with our life. Like, am I going to hang out with X person? Am I going to do X job? Am I going to move here? Like, we have a lot of change that's more or less in our control coming up. And I think focusing on really the fact that it's okay if you make the wrong decision, because you're never stuck in that decision is so important. Like you said, like always going into rooms with more doors rather than less. Like, where will this take me rather than this is my final destination? Like, there is no final destination. Like,
there's only one. There's only one last decision. That's it. The other thing that I would say is to be super careful about. I mean, like super careful, like brutally, just. Be careful about who you spend your time with. And I don't just mean physically, I mean like on social media. There are studies that show that if you surround yourself with people who are obese, you are 70% more likely to become obese. Like that's almost a guarantee, right? 70, like if somebody said to you, here, smoke the cigarette, you have 70% chance to get in cancer, you wouldn't smoke the cigarette, right? So like if you hang out with people who are quote unquote obese, you are 70% more likely to be obese. But what's so fascinating about the study, and it's from the New York Times, is that they also say those people don't have to be the people you physically have dinner with every single night, or friends you go out to dinner on the weekends. They're just people who you hang out with, quote unquote, on social. So like if you're consuming content from people who are obese, you are 70% more likely to become obese. That to me is super fascinating. So like if you are following people who are positive, who are optimistic, who have agency, who believe in the same things that you believe in, you are more likely to become somebody who has optimism and has agency and actually feels like they have some change. So, number one, vote. You should all be voting, right? Like 4 million of you turn 18 every single year. You are a voting bloc. You can change the direction of this country in any way you want, anytime you decide. So like number one, vote. And number two, be just hyper vigilant with who you follow and who they follow, because that becomes your algorithm too. And I think those two things are the things that are mostly in your control right now.
I find that so insanely fascinating how like it's not just your friends, because I totally know about like the 5 people you surround yourself with are the top people you become like.
Okay, actually, that's actually not true. I learned this. I was so interested. Everyone says Jim Rohn, the 5 people you surround yourself with, right? He actually made that quote up. There's no science behind that quote. Isn't that amazing? There's no science behind it. But where there is science is that you will never outperform your inner circle. That's a John Wooden quote. But like, you're never going to be better than crap if you surround yourself with crap. Right? So like, I just think it's really, like the concept of it, like you become the average of the people that you're around. I think that generally holds true, but there's actually no science behind that actual quote.
That's crazy. Wow.
Totally.
I had no idea.
I had no idea.
But I do think it's interesting how what you said there, Laura, like it's not just who you're surrounded with. It's also who they're surrounded with. And I think that goes for social media, but also in real life, right? Like if you're spending time with people and they're surrounded by a crowd and you're like, oh, I disagree with that crowd, but I
don't like their friends, but they're okay.
And then it's like, no, because they probably talk similar to their friends. They probably value similar things.
Exactly.
Like they're friends with those people.
Exactly. Like if you're friends with someone, it usually means because you have similarities, even if maybe when they're with you, they may not act. I mean, sometimes we act differently around different people.
Yeah, and if they come to you and they're like, look, I'm not like them, but let me tell you what they said, you can guarantee that when they go to them, they're like, I'm not like you, but let me tell you what they said. Like the way people, like if somebody's talking smack about other people to you, they're talking smack about you to other people. Like that's just, people are people. And when they show you who they are, again, Maya Angelou, believe them.
Yes,
I know.
100%.
I love that motto. Like if people show you who they are.
And it's so hard, right? Because we want to believe that people are better. We want to believe that we're special. We want to believe that they'll change for us. But past is prologue.
100%. That's a good saying.
And people have so much power over you and the way you act. I mean, I know this isn't the best example, but a lot of my friends, they play a lot of volleyball. And I'm not the most athletic person. But during, free time, I would play volleyball with them. And over time, I've become a better volleyball player, even by just like rallying and having small games with them. But I think it shows, it's like, if you do things with people who do certain things, it's like you will get better or you'll get worse at doing things. So just spending time with people who are better than you, like in my case, they got me better at playing volleyball, but that are improving your skills and improving the person you are.
And like more optimistic. If you're around people who are always complaining like, oh my gosh, everything is so terrible, like my life is falling apart, like the teacher sucks and my parents suck and everything is just terrible, you're going to start to see that.
Yeah, misery is contagious. It is so contagious, but also joy is contagious too. So, my husband and I were talking this past weekend about the next 4 years and how we're going to get through them, right? The next 4 years, there's a lot of political chaos. Both of our kids are in college, so they'll be graduating. My son is a senior. Is he going to propose to his girlfriend? I don't know. They've been dating since the first day of, orientation. So there may be a wedding sometime in the next 4 years to plan. Our parents are older, like hopefully they'll continue, but they're in their 80s. Like there's a lot of change. And we were saying, like, how are we going to build up resiliency? How are we going to build up our stores? How are we going to build up and become anti-fragile over the course of like a lot of chaos and a lot of change that's happening? And again, we didn't grow up when you grew up, so we don't have as much muscle like to get through chaos. And we were saying that some of it, we want to make sure that we're spending time with people who are optimistic and joyful. Even if they're realistic about what's happening in the world, you can be realistic and optimistic. You don't have to be realistic and pessimistic and miserable. You can be like strategic and you can see the world in black and white, but you can also not ignore the happy things also. Some people over-index on the miserable things. They want to be miserable and they want you to be miserable too because it keeps them happy for everyone else to be miserable. It gives them identity, right? They feel like they're not losing out. And so I'm trying very hard this year to start minimizing the people who only come to me with misery all the time and start amping up the people who are energy boosters.
100%.
Definitely.
And I think it's all about that, like, focusing on the small and the good things in every day, like not ignoring problems and living in a made-up
avoid
world.
that.
Right. I'm not going to like put my head in the sand and be like, everything's great. We should all get along. Like there are real serious problems, existential problems that are facing our world. But there are things we can do, even if they're small things, every single day to make incremental change. And so I think focusing on that allows us to feel like we're at least creating some sort of progress long term.
And so a little bit of a shift in the conversation. Sometimes, and we kind of touched on this, but when we're trying new things, we might experience what is called, known as sometimes, imposter syndrome. And in one of your books, Wonder Hell, you talk about imposter town and how we can get caught up in our own head. So is there a way to overcome this kind of imposter syndrome mindset?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that most of the people that I spoke to did was shifting that word from I've never done this before to I've never done this before. I think that when I spoke to all of these people, it was shocking to me that every one of them had imposter syndrome. And they actually didn't see imposter syndrome as a bad thing, right? Like, let's break down the term for a minute. Imposter. You don't belong here. Maybe you should leave, right? Or syndrome. You seem a little sick. Maybe you should lie down. Like, it's a diagnosis. There's something wrong with you for being in a room where you've never been in before, sitting across the table from people who don't love like you, think like you, look like you, pray like you, right? Like, there's something wrong with you for having the audacity to be in a room that never welcomed anybody like you before. It's a diagnosis? Like, no. So the people who I spoke to, they didn't see it as a diagnosis. They were like, hell yeah, I've never done this before. Cool. Awesome for me for getting here. They saw it as a badge of honor. They saw it as a sign that they were actually on the right track. And so just shifting our mindset from saying, oh, imposter syndrome is bad to imposter syndrome is awesome. Like, how amazing that I'm in a room I never thought I'd be in before. Good for me for getting here. Cool. And then, frankly, I think you take the Alona Mayer approach. I don't know if you saw her post where they were like, she was like, I don't have imposter syndrome. I believe I deserve all the things I worked my ass off for. Yeah, period. End of paragraph. That's it. I was like, that right there. That is my new mantra. I believe I deserve all the things that I've worked my ass off for.
Exactly.
I
And
love
it's like,
that.
if you already have this opportunity, why are you trying to deny it from yourself? Like, other people, and not that you need to seek external validation, but if you have an opportunity and other people have given you this opportunity and someone believes in you, why are we trying to now take ourselves down and saying, wait, I don't know, like why am I here?
Totally. I was giving a keynote at Google last month, and a woman in the front row was like, hi, I have a question. I was invited to be on this panel, and I don't really think that I belong on the panel, so I'm thinking about saying no. Like, what do you think I should do? And I was like, well, who else is on the panel? And she was like, this CEO, that CEO, and that CEO. And of course, they're all dudes. And she's like, but I'm not a CEO, so like, I don't think I belong on the panel. And I said, well, do you respect the people who put the panel together? And she said, yes. And I said, do you think that the people who put the panel together know what they're talking about? She said, yes. And I said, do you think the people on the panel know who you are, know what your background is? And she said, yes. And I said, and are you being asked to be on the panel because you're a subject matter expert on the panel topic? And she said, yes. And I said, and the other dudes, are they subject matter experts on the panel topic? And she said, yes. And I said, well, it sounds like you're all peers to me. And everyone in the room erupted in clapping. And I was like, there you go, right? So I love that point of like, you're in the room. The person who invited you in the room knows what they're doing. Don't disrespect them. They know more than you do, and they invited you to be there. So clearly they think you belong. You belong.
Exactly. So like, don't be the one to kind of shut yourself down and tell yourself no. Like, go for it. And honestly, like, just sometimes that even means like taking a bit of a risk and like a leap, and like maybe you feel a bit uncertain, but the only way to ever grow in certainty, in skills and confidence is to take that little risk at first, that little jump at first.
Totally.
I will tell you the scariest thing I ever said in a business meeting was, I don't know. I don't know, but I'll find out. And the person who I said it to was the President of the United States. Right? It's in the Oval Office. I don't know, but I'll find out. And guess what? Nobody threw me out. My pants didn't light on fire. I didn't spontaneously combust. He said, next. Okay, next. And we kept on with the meeting. And then I sent a memo that afternoon with the answer to the question, and nobody ever talked about it again. Nobody cared. Nobody thought anything about me. Eleanor Roosevelt, right? Like, nobody cares. It's okay to not know. Nobody's perfect, and it's okay. The worst thing you can do is to fake it and pretend like you know what you're talking about and give an answer that turns out to be wrong, then you never get invited back. But saying, I don't know, but I'll find out. And then go find out. If I can say it to the President of the United States in the Oval Office, you can say it to anybody you want.
I think that's amazing. You know, you need to own it if you don't know it. Oh, that rhymed.
I've actually never written about or that or spoken about that, and I probably should, because that would be a good story.
That's a great story.
I mean, there's no problem with not knowing the answer as long as you do go find out.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You know, as long as you have that initiative, then people will respect that.
There is very precious little information that people need to know exactly in the moment.
Totally. And I think that sometimes when we are, trying something new or experiencing, even sometimes ordinary circumstances, like math class or a tough sport, we don't reach our standards. Like maybe we get marked down on an essay, or we don't do so good on a quiz. Or, I think it was last year, I was taking volleyball in my gym class at school, and I was really not doing so great. I remember that I was so embarrassed, and I would always be picked last for my team, and I was like, whenever we had to pick teams, I was like, oh, please, I don't want to be here right now.
The worst. I was always picked last, always.
And so I remember this one specific class where we got our marks for volleyball, and I got like a 60, and I was so disappointed. I was like, this isn't my fault. Like, my teacher just didn't teach me. Like, I could be like a volleyball champ if I was just like coached properly. But then I was like, hold on, Mercedes, like this mindset of like the world is against me, my teacher's against me, like they don't want me to do good in this sport, like that's not helping anyone. And I think sometimes we can slip into that mindset of like, we've done poorly, the teachers don't like us, the system is broken, oh, my partner slacked off, it wasn't me. And so there's like a million different excuses that we can make to make ourselves into the victim and not like as if we couldn't have done anything to better the situation. So how would you say, Laura, is this victim mentality unproductive, and how could we overcome it?
Well, I don't think I could say it any better than you just did. That's a great story. I will give you a tool that my friend Tasha Eurich uses. Tasha Eurich has a PhD in psychology. She is the world's expert on self-awareness. And she says we have to change the question. We have to change the question from why. Why was that bad? Why did I fail? Why do they hate me? Why, didn't they teach me volleyball? To what? What can I do differently? What can I do better? What should I do next? Right? And when we have these like why me questions, it puts us in this victim blaming, shaming kind of mindset, whereas the what is more forward motion and action oriented. So I think you did. I mean, your story's great. I think that, and I don't know that I could tell a better version of it, but what I will say is when I was in executive search, we would interview candidates, and every time I'd want to hear, what they did well, what their successes were, but of course I also want to know what didn't go so well. I wanted to hear what some of their challenges are, what some of their weaknesses were. And I would ask questions about things that maybe didn't work out. And I'd listen to the stories, and when they would tell me the stories, I would then ask them, well, what do you think you would have done differently? What do you think you could have done better next time? What did you take from this? And the ones that would say, well, it was Bob's fault, or well, it was Jane didn't do it this way or that way. Everybody who was pointing fingers at somebody else, I was like, they haven't learned a thing. No self-awareness. They didn't turn the mirror on themselves. The people that would say, well, what we learned is that we need to start the process 6 months earlier, or we needed to get this cohort involved or this community invested. Those people, I was like, okay, they've stopped, they've learned, right? They've done the what question instead of the why, the victim question.
I think it's so important to have that moment of just saying it's okay if maybe I did something wrong, because we can't always be perfect. And I think that oftentimes is what creates the victim mindset, is because we're so scared of not doing something right that we just want to point the finger onto someone else so that we don't have to feel that burden of we did something wrong. And
yeah, it's way easier. And I think what we also then don't do is we then don't go to school on what we did right. So one of the things I wrote about in I think it was in Limitless, I'm not sure, was that Serena Williams, when she went out to practice tennis, she would spend 10% of her time fixing the stuff that was wrong, that she did wrong, the mistakes she made in the last match, but 90% of her time was redoing the stuff she did right. Because I think we give ourselves, I think we punish ourselves too much for the mistakes, but I think we also give ourselves too much credit for the things we did right. Because a lot of times, when you give that presentation in class, a lot of times you just got lucky, right? So how do you groove the pattern of what went right if you don't practice what went right also? So anytime I'm practicing for a keynote, I always go back and I redo the part that I messed up the last time. And for the first couple of years of keynoting, I would not redo the parts that I did right. And then every time there was just a different 10% that I messed up. So I was never actually getting better, because I was just trying to stick my fingers in the dike of all the little leaks that were coming through, but I wasn't rebuilding the entire dam in a way that worked. So I think we have to, as we get out of the victim mentality, it's also making sure that we're focusing on where we're the hero also, and making sure that we groove that pattern, that we don't just get lucky each time.
I love that. I love that idea of reinforcing that, because clearly we did good on it once. Yeah. We made that serve in volleyball, but that doesn't mean we have to stop practicing altogether.
Right. Plus, if you practice the stuff you did well, you also get the dopamine hit, the serotonin boost. It makes you want to keep going. It makes you want to keep practicing the stuff you messed up, because you're also getting some positive reinforcement at the same time.
Totally.
Most definitely. And you've spoken a lot on the importance of the journey and appreciating the whole time, instead of just saying, this is my end goal, I'm gonna just thug it out until I get then. So what is your advice for teens to focus on the process rather than just the destination?
This is such an interesting concept, right? That it's about the journey. And for me, it became very clear to me when I interviewed Allison Levine. And Allison Levine, she captained the first all-women's American summit up Everest, right? So all women, first time, all the way up Everest. And it took her 2 times to do it. So the first time she did it, Everest is 29,029 feet in the air. That's the top of Everest. And they got all the way to 250 feet from the top, right? So almost 29,029 feet. And you go up and down to base camp to equilibrate, I don't know what the word is, to get get your oxygen stores. So it takes, weeks to go up and down to base camp 1, base camp 2, down to the bottom. They got all the way 250 feet from the top, and bad weather rolls in. And Allison is the captain, so she has to make a decision. Do we keep going all the way to the top in bad weather and risk it? Or do I turn around now to make sure that I get my team back safe? back to the ground. And she made the decision in the moment to turn around. So she's 250 feet from this thing that they've been training for years, that they've been spending months trying to summit. And she makes the decision to bring it back down. And she said, I was never going to go back up Everest again. Like I tried, like I did it, like I got, as far as I could get. And then she was sitting at a dinner party and some like finance bro is sitting next to her. And she's introduced as a person who summited Everest. And the story comes out, and about halfway through the dinner party, he's like, oh, so you didn't really climb Everest, huh? Right? Like, this guy probably hasn't climbed a local hill, but like he has this commentary to her because of course he does. And about 6 months later, a woman who was on that climb with them died. She had breast cancer, I think, and she died very young. And Allison's like, we're going to go back up. We're going to go back up. We're going to honor her. So she and a bunch of friends get together. They go up Everest. She gets all the way to the top. And I was like, you made it. Like, you got to the top. That's amazing. Did you celebrate? Was it incredible? How long do you spend up there? Is it like a party? Like, do you spend the night? What do you do? And she's like, what are you talking about? She's like, it's Everest. You're 29,029 feet in there. There's no oxygen. I pulled out a selfie. Pulled out a picture of my friend and my ice pick, her ice pick that had her name on it. I took a selfie. I put my oxygen mask back on. I put the pick in my pocket, I put the picture in my pocket, and I went back down. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, you got all the way there. It took you 2 attempts and years and to train and months to get up there. And she was like, yeah. She's like, Laura, success isn't getting to the top. It's getting all the way back down alive. And I was like, oh, okay, right? So like we had this idea that we're gonna like get to the top of Everest and everything's gonna be amazing and that's gonna be that. And all that does is steal away all of what's in the journey in between, because life is a whole journey. It's like this idea of wonder hell that I talk about in the book. Like we think every time we have a success, that's gonna be it. Like I've done it, everything's gonna be amazing. But it turns out that that's just like a step along the way each time. So like if you're climbing, like you and me, like we climb regular mountains, right? So if you're climbing a 4,000 foot mountain, you're at the bottom of the mountain and you look at the top and you're like, I wanna go there. And you see the top of the mountain and you get halfway up and then you see one of those signs for like a pretty view. So you like walk off the path and you like look at the view, and what do you see? You see the top of your mountain, but then you also see like the 6,000 foot mountain behind it. And now you're like, oh, actually I want to go there. So if you're not actually enjoying the mountain and the only time you're celebrating is when you finally get to the top of that mountain for 3 minutes, you're missing out on like a whole lot of fun along the way.
Definitely. And I love the mountain analogy, and wow, what an incredible story of Allison. Like that's amazing.
She's an incredible human. Yeah.
I can't even like barely make. I tried to go for a walk with my mom before this episode, and I'm wearing like linen pants, and it's like, I don't know. I was like, I have to go back in, and I went back inside because I was so cold.
Yeah, I don't know why you did that. We're in Canada, and it's like January. I don't know why.
I was wearing the linen pants, and I was like, not today. Like it's too cold and windy, so I just went back.
I ran out to the local drugstore today wearing my Birkenstock slippers because I was too lazy to change my shoes, and I didn't have any socks on, and I was like, oh my god, my ankles! It's so cold. I'm in Boston. I'm like, it's so cold out. I can't imagine climbing Everest. But just like you think about it. Like it is so hard to do hard things, but it's so rewarding also. I mean, you talked about the journey and you talked about volleyball and, not being good at gym class. I almost flunked gym class every single year. I had every single excuse ever to get out of gym class. I think I told my teacher I was menstruating like every third day just so I could like not have to do stuff in gym class. Meanwhile, I turned 40 years old. I have a midlife crisis. I'm like, I gotta move my body. I run a mile. It takes me 6 weeks to actually run a mile without stopping. 6 weeks. And then I run the mile. At the end of the mile, I was like, what if I could run 3 miles? Like, what if I could run a 5K? So it took me another 6 weeks to run a 5K. And then at the end of the 5K, I was like, what if I could do a 10K? I live in Boston. You know where this is going. The next thing you know, I'm signed up for the Boston Marathon. I'm about to turn 54 in 2-3 weeks. And in 5 weeks, I'm going to run the Tokyo Marathon, which is going to be my last of all the 6 majors. Did I think that I was an athlete when I was your age? Did I think that I could run? Never. No way. Like literally the first mile of my life when I turned 40. So like the journey is really long, and you're going to learn so much about yourself at every different phase and at every different age. And you just got to, like, as you say, go with the flow. Like let it all come in. Like don't just automatically dismiss like, oh, I'm not an athlete, so I can't do that. Like you have no idea. You have no idea who you are and what's inside of you and how you're going to grow and how you're going to change and how you're going to evolve. The only thing that you have control over is just saying yes.
I think it's so exciting. And like, yes, it's a little bit scary that maybe you're not even going to get to know who you truly are for years to come and you are going to change as a person. But I think that that's what's exciting too. And like,
Totally.
it's kind of that mindset shift that you talked about there, Laura, is like, if you can really just find like, it's exciting how much there is to learn it.
I don't know. I think I'd be really bored being inside my own brain if it was the same thing for 90 years of life. Like, that'd be really boring. Like, I love that it's different. I mean, sometimes I wish it was a little bit, not so different every day. But, I like that we get to learn and we get to grow, and that there's, I had a friend of mine the other day that was like, we should take up golf. And I was like, I don't want to golf. Like, golfing is a game. I'll play games when I can't play sports anymore. Like, there's time for golf. I'm too young for golf. I know there's plenty of young golf players. But, I was just like, there are ages and stages for everything. And I believe you can have it all. I believe you can do it all. You just can't have and do it all at the same exact time. So, like, what are the ages and stages for different things you want to do at different points in your life?
100%.
Totally. I think that's such a great mindset to have, is just know that like there's so much time, especially for teenagers. It's like
so much time.
Your entire life ahead of you. You don't need to do everything tomorrow. It's okay to take a deep breath.
But it feels like you're running out of time. You have to make decisions. Every decision you make is definitional to who you are and who you're ever going to be. And it's really not. It's really not. There are so many opportunities for on-ramps and off-ramps, and nobody sees the hard work that you're doing, and then they see you pop up, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, what an overnight success. And it's like, no, you didn't see the work that I was doing in the dark, that nobody, like everybody else is sleeping, like you didn't see that, and you just see this part of me. So like we all, like I call it like skunk works, right? Like we can all have our little skunk works operation where we're like researching and developing all the different parts of our personality. Like you have no idea. I could be working in my kitchen for the next 7 years about how to brew the best micro beer ever. And then all of a sudden I like go to market with a label of micro beers. Like, how do you know? You don't know. I'm not doing that, but that was the most random thing I could think of. But you don't know what other people are working on, and then they pop up and they're successful. And it's not because they're just automatically successful and you're not. It's because they're just doing stuff that you weren't paying attention to. Because to bring it back to the beginning of the conversation, nobody's paying attention to any of us, just us.
Yep. 100%. And I think that that's so important for teens to hear.
Totally.
Because there's so many, it feels like all these big decisions coming up, but realistically, it's just one step of so many, one decision out of literally hundreds of thousands that you're going to make, and it's okay to kind of give it a little less emphasis.
Yeah, more than half of all workers across the United States, and I'm sure that this holds for Canada as well, do not work in the major in which they studied at college. More than half, right? So it doesn't even matter what you major in. Right? You want to be a doctor, you got to be pre-med. You want to be a lawyer, you got to, right? Some of those things might matter. But the truth is, it really doesn't really matter as much as we think it does. Do interesting things with interesting opportunities do interesting things with interesting people, and interesting opportunities arise. That's it.
That is wild. That's huge statistic.
I'm all about liberating statistics and studies.
I love it.
I know you have so many amazing statistics just
you
on hand, and
TLDR, none of it matters. Don't worry so much.
I love it. I love it. And so you are an incredible public speaker, and I know that we touched on this a little bit earlier, but as someone who really was not a big fan of the public speaking thing initially, and I know you gave a little tip earlier, is there any other advice?
Yes. The way that I got comfortable speaking in public was getting comfortable not speaking in public. And what I mean by that is you can be quiet on stage. You can be silent on stage. You don't have to the whole time. Everyone's speak slower. Okay, I don't get on stage and speak like this. I get on stage and I speak like this, which gives your mind time to pause and listen and reflect and digest. And then I move on to the next idea, right? So I don't move on to the next idea. That's very hard to listen to. But I speak at my normal cadence and I pause and I understand that the conversation that I'm having on stage is actually a conversation. Even though I'm the only one speaking out loud, you're still speaking back to me in your mind. So sometimes I'll walk across the stage and I'll present a problem, and then I pause for a moment. And then I walk back across the stage and then I present the solution. And while I'm walking, it feels like a lot of silence, but the audience is not feeling silent because they're talking to themselves in their own brain, digesting what I'm saying. And so when I say the way I got comfortable speaking on stage was not speaking on stage, like just pausing, having that space. It makes you seem wise. It makes you seem like you're in control. Everyone's like, you're so in control on stage. You own it. You're so comfortable up there. I'm like, I'm not comfortable up there. I'm just counting in my head, giving you time to think so that then I can start talking again. So we always think we have to like fill all the space, but the truth is we have to like have that conversation that's a two-way conversation even though they're silent.
I think that's so amazing because I know that for sure, like when you're listening to someone speak, especially on a presentation, it's like you're thinking back like, oh, I agree with this. Oh, I didn't know this.
Right. Or that's affecting me in this way, or oh, that reminds me of this thing that happened to me, right? You're doing all of that inside of your head.
Totally. And as the speaker, you may not like notice all the other conversations going on in other people's heads, but I mean, it's still happening, and being able to take notice of that and just having that composure and calm.
So that's one tip. The second tip is you don't have to apologize for being there. You don't have to apologize for messing up. Nobody in the audience knows what you were planning on saying. So if you messed up something, if you skipped a slide, you don't have to be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. There was actually the slide. Nobody knows. They don't know. You don't have to get up there and tell them all the reasons that you belong up there. You belong up there. You were put on that stage. Tell them what you want to tell them. They don't know that you're not telling them. They don't know what you forgot to say unless you tell them. So don't tell them.
Totally. I mean, I remember one thing, because me and Mercedes used to do piano a lot, and we used to do piano recitals. And I remember listening to people play, and I was never actually, I always thought that like everyone else was just much better than me, because I didn't love practicing all the time. So, but it was also interesting to see because people would be playing their songs, and not all of them were like super like recognizable songs. And I just assumed that everyone was doing a really, really good job, which I'm sure they were. They practiced a lot and they were really good at playing piano. But I'm sure also that if they made the smallest mistake, maybe they didn't hold for as long as they should have, maybe they accidentally tapped the wrong note, we wouldn't really notice.
Unless they stopped and they were like, oh, I'm so sorry, I messed this up, right? Like you would never do that. And you thought that there's absolutely zero chance that all of those other players were perfect. There's zero chance. In the same way that when somebody's watching you speak, they think you're perfect too. They're thinking the same thing. Oh, she must have practiced this a ton. Like she's so much a better speaker than I am, right? Everyone's having the same ideas.
And most people will tend to, I think, somewhat internalize it. They'll be like, oh, I wish like I could speak like that. Or, you know, how did they get this great skill? And meanwhile, you're like, oh my gosh, everyone must think I'm like awful at this presentation. Like it's so fascinating to me how we will kind of personalize and internalize
the spotlight effect.
Yeah, the spotlight effect, exactly.
I will literally be on stage in front of 5,000 people giving my talk out of my mouth with the tape in the back of my head being like, oh, you forgot that slide, or oh, you forgot that word, or oh, you didn't say this thing that now you can't do the callback joke later, or oh, that person in the front row is staring at their phone, and why is that person in the second row leaving? Do they hate me, or do they just get a phone call? Is their wife in labor? Like the whole time while I'm giving my talk, the tape is going on in the back of my head, and that night I will go to bed and I will be waking up in the middle of the night rehearsing the part of the talk that I messed up every time. And I do this for a living. I get paid a lot of money to do this for a living, and still. But people think I'm great because they don't know, because I don't tell them that I'm not.
Yeah, exactly. Don't point out your flaws.
The rest of the world is going to have a heyday pulling you down. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm.
I 100%
love
that mindset. And I think it's important, like, we need to believe in ourselves and we need to be confident in ourselves. And, like, if you mess up, you're literally a human. We're not, you know, some sort of perfect program or robot that
AI
can just, like, perform.
And also, you can survive it. I mean, I was at a keynote in Hawaii. They flew me all the way to Hawaii to give this keynote to, like, their highest performers of this company. And my slides just started, like, automatically shifting, like, automatically going ahead, like, before I got there. So, like, the jokes I was going to tell, any money line I wanted to have, it was like they were already going, and I was just like giving my talk, and I was like holding the the little clicker like out here so that people could see that I wasn't doing it while I was still giving my talk, and the thing in the back of my head was going, oh my God, what's happening? What's happening? And then the AV guy came out and gave me a second clicker, which it still didn't solve the problem. And by the end of it, I was like weaving jokes into like like all the things going wrong into the talk. And by the end of it, they gave me a standing ovation because they were like, how did you get through that? That was incredible. You're such a pro. I got even more credit because things went wrong because I just went with the flow.
Yep, I love that. You just gotta go with it.
What else am I gonna do? I'm on stage in front of 1,000 people. Like I'm like, all right, I got 45 minutes to die up here in front of all of these people. It's just me and the Klieg lights, and I'm just gonna, okay, guess this is what we're doing.
Exactly. And I think that sometimes what we underestimate is like, even if you're giving a presentation like in school, like other people have grace and like other students get it. They're like,
they want to see you succeed.
and they get it. They're like, oh, it's stressful. Like they did a good job, or, you know, good for them for memorizing that, or good for them for like having it half memorized. Like they're doing better than I could. Like people are genuinely, they, like you said, Laura, exactly. They want to see you succeed.
Yes.
Yes, so now on a personal note, what is
Yes.
something that you struggle with and that others may not expect?
If our episodes help you hack your happiness and find a small bit of happiness in every day, be sure to share this episode with a teen in your life or anyone in your life who could use a small bit of happiness, as well as shop our happiness wellness products to bring a small bit of happiness to your home, linked in the description.
I think that people are surprised when I tell them that I'm an introvert. That I make my living on stage in front of thousands of people. I make my living on screens on Good Morning America, but I would always much rather be home snuggling my dog. I get energized being alone. Like I think people are surprised that you can be an introvert and still have an extroverted job. That they think that you either are one or the other, but in fact we amp up parts of our personality for different roles that we have to play.
That is so interesting because I think you're right. Like the fact that you speak at all these conferences, it doesn't take away from the fact that like you are happy to do that, but you can also really find a lot of happiness in just some quiet time alone at home with the dog.
Absolutely. I mean, like some people think like, oh, you're out, you're speaking, you're doing this. It's like, I don't speak and then like go party at the conference the rest of the afternoon. I'd like go to my room and order room service. And sometimes I don't even watch Netflix because that's like too much interaction. So like I leave it all out there. Like everyone has a certain amount of social battery and mine drains quickly on stage. But I also can get very re-energized by just having really good, deep conversations with a small group of people, right? So I think people are surprised because they think the public person that you see is one person, and they don't realize that we all have so many different facets.
100%.
definitely.
And we can like kind of, like you said, like we can step into different parts of ourselves. Like if we're going into a stressful situation, we might kind of put on a more calm front. And if we're going into a place where we're going to be surrounded by friends, like maybe we get super energized. And then if we're going into a space where we're unfamiliar, we might kind of like, even if we're extroverted, kind of become more quiet. Depends on the case. I think that really depends.
Absolutely. And this isn't a fake it till you make it kind of thing. This isn't like put on an alter ego and be that person until it becomes you. This is figure out what parts of you are the parts of you who you love, right? Like when are you at your best, and how do you amp that version of yourself up more often when you need it so that you become much more comfortable embodying that person. Like the whole alter ego idea, like Beyonce has Sasha Fierce. That's amazing, and that allows her to find that version of herself on stage. It's a great way to find a bolder version of yourself, but it doesn't mean that then you become that person all the time. It's just, this is just a way to like, I am Laura, but on stage, I'm LGO, right? Like I'm hey LGO on all the socials. I'm LGO, that's like my thing. But at home, I'm not LGO at the kitchen table, right? I'm just Laura, I'm mom, right? I'm my husband's wife, right? Like there are different roles that I play, and so I amp up different parts of my personality as it's needed for that moment, and I get comfortable playing those different roles. So it's not faking it till you make it, it's just sort of being it as you are becoming it, as you're discovering it.
I love that.
That's wonderful. And so what would you say, Laura, is one piece of advice that you would give to your teenage self?
Probably to probably to floss my teeth and to use sunscreen. That's what I would tell myself. I would tell myself that because I do think you can pretty much get anything else back. There's a lot of do-overs, but like you only get one set of teeth, and the sun damage you get is all before you're 18 years old. But in terms of who I want to become as a human, I would tell myself to be more courageous earlier, because there are very, very few mistakes that can't be undone, that you can't learn from, that you can't grow from, that don't teach you some part of yourself, that you don't find adventure in. Be more courageous earlier.
Definitely. I think that, first of all, self-care is essential, making sure that we take good care of ourselves, and that way we can be the best, happiest version of ourselves is definitely something that I think we all need to think about, as well as, being brave and putting ourselves out there is so important.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. So, do you do something that brings you happiness every day, and what do you do?
Well, I do snuggle my dog as much as I can. What do I do that brings me happiness? I've got 2 boys that are in college. I either text them or FaceTime with them every day, and their boyfriend and girlfriend. And I think spending time watching the people you love being loved is a huge gift that I did not expect to have. I didn't know that was a feeling, like watching the people that I love actively being loved. So for you, I would say, like, look at your friends, like look at how your friends love on each other. Like that to me there's a lot of joy in there that I never thought to pay attention to earlier than now.
I love that.
I think you guys call it gassing each other up, right? Is that it? Gassing each, is that it? Do people still say that? Like just watching, like if you go on your friend's Instagram and then you see your other mutual friends gassing them up, like in the comments, like that's such a lovely expression. That's just such a lovely expression of joy, and it's so generous, and we should just all spend more time in that space.
100%. I mean, Anastasia and I spoke to a kindness expert, and she said that, when we're kind to others, and I guess like love others and compliment others, we feel happier, and so does the person that's receiving that affection or love or kindness.
That's the contagious joy.
So do people around us and in the community, and I think so. I think that that's really kind of what you're talking about there, is like when we notice kind things being done and other people getting love, like it makes us feel happy and like wow, like there are really good things happening in the world too.
And bring voice to that. I saw how you were loving on this person. I saw how you were being so kind. Like bringing voice to that and appreciating that for other people. It's a gift to them. It's a gift to you. It grooves the pattern of the things that we're doing well, catching everybody being good. It's just a giant, kindness hydra where like more kindness just pops up in its place.
Definitely. And so, Laura, if our listeners want to keep up and learn more, where would be the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, so my name is Laura Gassner Otting. I'm known as LGO to all my friends. So I'm at Hey LGO, HEYLGO, across all the socials.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for all of the incredible insights today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I have to say that I like to line these podcasts up, so I'm doing a bunch all on one day because, hair and makeup, you only got to do it like one day a week if I can. And I have had interviews with 6 different grown-ups today, and then you guys, and this interview has been by far the most thoughtful, the most interesting, the most joyous. So well done, you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness, and thank you so much to Laura for joining us today.
She is just such a powerhouse of excitement and energy and incredible insights, quotes, metaphors, all of that incredible
statistics.
Stuff. Yes, Anastasia, what was your biggest takeaway from today?
I think my biggest takeaway is that no decision will be a be-all, end-all. You're not going to have one life-changing decision that you're never going to be able to fix.
I mean, maybe there's a few, but...
maybe, but in the end, if you choose a certain university or an internship, that's not going to change the whole trajectory of your entire life. You can always go back and fix past mistakes. What about you?
I absolutely love that, and I definitely think that as teens who are in today's world, like, we get so caught up in that present moment, and like, it's good to be in the present moment, but sometimes if we're too focused on one decision, we get stuck, and then we're like, oh my gosh, and we get overwhelmed by this one decision. But my biggest takeaway, other than that, is the importance of the journey, not the end destination, because at the end of the day, there is no end destination. Like, all of life is a constant journey, and we've just kind of got to keep flowing through it. And like Laura said, like all these successful people that she interviewed for Wonder Hell, her book, none of them had only been on one career path. I mean, most people don't even work in what they majored in college or in university.
Exactly.
So like, really don't stick yourself into a box. Like, anything is possible. You could become an athlete in your 50s, even if you hated sports as a teen.
And you don't want to just get to the top of your Everest, take that 3-second photo, and then walk the way back down and just feel like you just didn't appreciate the experience enough.
Exactly. If you enjoyed today's episode with Laura, I think you'd absolutely love our podcast episode with Tim Story, a renowned life coach. Tim has worked with celebrities such as Robert Downey Jr., Kanye West, and beyond, and his hacks are incredible.
We're all going through recovery and discovery at the same time. Recovery of your past, which is going to be different because you're two different people. Recovery of what you're currently going through. And if you're not careful, though, you'll get caught up what I call the recovery zone, and you'll miss the discovery zone.
Definitely check out our podcast episode with him, link in the show notes.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, please leave us a 5-star review from wherever you're listening. It really helps us out and we really appreciate it.
We would absolutely love it if you joined our happiness family. It's completely free, and that way you never miss another episode. You can join by following Hack Your Happiness on whichever podcast platform you're listening on now.
See you next time.